Embassy of Israel, to all the sponsors of this, to this university. It's really, it's exciting for me to be in Colombia. It's not everywhere I go, and I've been traveling a lot, where the president of the country sends out a tweet to welcome me to the country. And I'm very excited that President Santos wrote the introduction to Startup Nation, along with President Shimon Peres of Israel. As Catalina said, I responded to President Santos' tweet by saying that it's exciting to be in Colombia, the next Startup Nation. And I really do think that Colombia can be a very innovative place, that Colombia can build an innovation sector. And I think that really is the most important lesson coming up from Startup Nation, from the book, from the story of Israel, is that if a country like Israel, which has faced so many different kinds of adversity, from being a small country to not having a lot of water or resources, to boycotts, being in not a very friendly neighborhood, to not having any really local market to speak of, being shut off from the regional market. All these, what most people would think would be disadvantages, Israel has turned into advantages or a source of inspiration for its need to innovate. Now, we call it Startup Nation because Israel has more startups than anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. And I think an important thing to understand about these startups is that one way of measuring the importance of startups is the investment they receive. Because the startup is called venture capital. It's the kind of investment, like startups themselves, is very risky. They know that most startups fail, including in Israel. Most startups in Silicon Valley fail. It's part of the business of doing startups. And so venture capital is kind of the word venture is kind of a polite word for gambling, where you hope, you put your money in and you hope that if you bet on 10 or 20 companies, that one of them will be the next Facebook or Google or something like that, and will make it work out. And so this venture capital fund or venture capital industry has become a global thing, and it's looking really all over the world for good startups. And so it's, I think, important that Israel receives 2.5 times as much venture capital per capita as the United States, 30 times as much on average as Europe. And but the interesting question is not these statistics. The interesting question is, what is it about Israel that caused this to happen? And I think I was sitting next to, was it Carlos, the one who read the book so quickly, just now at lunch. Yeah. I was sitting next to him at lunch, and he was saying he was very proud. He had the copy of the book, and he read it in 6.5 hours yesterday or something. I think the reason why it's fun to read is because it's really full of stories. And in fact, the story that he asked me to tell there, which I'll tell here, is the main story of the book, is a very interesting one, because one of the, I think, amazing things about this story is that you would think that a tiny country like Israel wouldn't even be able to think about tackling a global problem. But in Israel, we are. We're tackling a global problem, which is the dependence of the world on oil. We're going to be the first country, I hope, to get off of oil, to replace gas cars on a mass scale with electric cars. And the company that's doing this is a company called Better Place. And it began as an idea. an idea of a man named Shai Agassi, who was just fired from the company that he founded. That's another story. But he had this idea that if we could just get a tiny country, any country, off of oil, the whole world could get off of oil. And he had this idea that the solution to the problem was to separate the battery from the car. What if the problem with the electric car is the batteries don't go as far as a tank of gas? So people are worried they're going to run out. And the other problem with the electric car is that they're expensive, because batteries are expensive. So he decided to solve both problems by separating the battery from the car. And the way you do that is you create an infrastructure where you can, and you build cars where you can just drive into a place that's like a gas station, and when your battery is low, and take out the empty battery and put in a full one in 5 minutes. And when we wrote about the book, this story, actually, the book originally came out in November 2009. We were writing the book even in 2008. And Dan and I wrote it with Dan Senor. We were wondering, should we talk about this company, Better Place? I mean, what if we write this whole story and it goes out of business? It just disappears. That's the problem with writing about startups is, your book lasts a little longer than most startups are supposed to. So back then it was just kind of an idea. And the exciting thing is now I have one of these cars. When I go back to Israel, I drive around the country. I go into these swap stations. I swap out my battery. I have a charge point in my parking spot. I charge this car every night, like you charge your cell phone at night. You need enough electricity for the next day, most of the time. So when I'm driving around the city, I never have to swap the batteries. Only when I'm going farther than the range of the battery. Most of the time, my gas station is the charge point in my building. So what's exciting about this is not just the particular story and the fact that this is happening now in Israel, it's happening in Denmark, it's happening next in Australia, which is going to show this is a big country. This is also for big countries. It's not just something for small countries. What's exciting to me about this is that it's a model for solving global problems. Basically, the idea that any country can tackle a global problem by implementing a solution that other countries can adopt. And I really hope that Israel does this going forward, that we tackle other global problems. I think education is actually a global problem. I think our education systems have to be reinvented, not just both on the kind of university level and on the high school and all levels. And in fact, in Israel, the strange thing is that we both have world-class universities and we have an education crisis, which is funny because we have 4 or 5, I think actually now 5 universities that are in the top 400 universities in the world, and 3 or 4 of them are in the top 100. The Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, the Weizmann Institute, the Technion, but I think those universities have to be reinvented as well. That we're going into a new world. And that's actually sort of what I want to talk about most, because I think that you need to realize that we're living at one of the most exciting times in history. We're living at a time, the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be a one-time transition in history, which is basically right now you have 2.2 billion people on the internet. About 1 billion of them are in rich countries, about 1.2 billion, a majority are outside of the rich countries already. And the world population is moving from, say, 7 billion to 9 billion. But the more important thing is not the overall size of the world population, but the number of people on the internet. That is going from 2.2 now to 5 or 6 in just the next 10 or 15 years. In other words, the majority of the world is getting onto the internet kind of as we speak, not only in our lifetimes, now. And already, the majority world is on cell phones. I mean, in very poor countries like Kenya, I was in Kenya recently, and I was invited by a foundation that advises African governments, and I was one of a number of people from different countries who came to meet with the Prime Minister at a resort 20 minutes flight by small plane out of Nairobi. And there I met a guy named Solomon, who's a Maasai tribesman. And you know, he was wearing the very colorful clothing that Maasai tribesmen wear, very, you know. He had never been to Nairobi. Lived in Kenya, of course, his whole life. He came from a village 3 hours walk from where we were. That village had no electricity. Probably didn't have, you know, good water systems. I'm sure he had no credit card, no bank account. But he had a cell phone, and that cell phone had coverage where we were in the middle of nowhere. And he had 2 SIM cards for his cell phone. One of them for Airtel. In fact, in Kenya, they were telling me that they have up to 4 SIM cards on their phones. We don't have that in Israel. He had 2 SIM cards, one for Airtel, which was the cheap phone calls, and the other for Safaricom, because Safaricom had something called M-Pesa. And with M-Pesa, this Solomon could do things that I can't do with this, you know, fancy iPhone in Startup Nation. He could pay people, he could get paid, he could send money around. They have a mobile payment system that the majority, I think the majority of the country now is on, called M-Pesa, that's based on text messages. So you don't need a smartphone. So basically what happened is that Kenya, which is sort of 50 years behind you know, the rich countries in infrastructure, has jumped up ahead in mobile payments. You know, all I could do with my fancy phone in Israel is pay for parking. And what this shows is that the world is changing very rapidly. And it also shows that we don't know where the innovation, the next innovation is going to come from. We're used to a world where innovation basically comes from the United States. You know, we're a world of the dominant companies like Google, Facebook, you know, whatever, you know, Twitter, so on. These are all American companies kind of coming out of Silicon Valley. And so we've sort of gotten used to this idea that that's where innovation comes from. And it even affects our idea of a startup. You know, our idea of a startup is sort of based on things like Facebook. It's an app to find a better restaurant or something like that. Meanwhile, I think that the world is moving to a very different paradigm, where the most important innovations, the most important part of the world economy, the most important, or the world culture, which also has tended to come from the United States, is going to start coming from everywhere. Instead of there being a sort of Copernican system with the sun being the United States and everything revolving around it, there's going to be multiple centers everywhere. And we don't know who the leader is going to be in each place. We don't know who the leader will be in Latin America. We don't know who the leader will be in Africa or in Asia or in Europe. You know, Skype came out of Estonia, not Germany, France, or Italy or the UK. M-Pesa is in Kenya. It doesn't go by the size of the country. I mean, Israel shows that. Israel's a tiny country, so it doesn't mean that Brazil is going to be the leader. We don't know who's going to be the leader. And Colombia has as good a chance as anyone, and I would say actually a better than normal chance, because Colombia is a place that's on the way up. I just came now from Argentina. I have to admit, I don't think I had that feeling, that same feeling. Though I saw some nice startups there, and I kept telling them basically, even though things may not look good in the macro situation, that shouldn't stop you. And that's another lesson, important lesson coming out of this, is that, you know, Colombia, like any country, has lots of challenges. There are lots of things that need to be fixed. There's lots of infrastructure that needs to be built. There are all kinds of obstacles. The good part is that you've overcome some of the biggest ones already, which is very impressive. But, you know, there are plenty more, and it's exciting to hear how much money the government is investing in infrastructure and in innovation and starting things like iNNpulsa. I think the fact that President Santos, you know, has involved himself and that the ministers were participating in this day of events and so on, you know, and that some of them have come to Israel. I think President Santos is going to come to Israel pretty soon. To me, all of this shows, you know, a lot of seriousness when it comes to promoting innovation. But what I'm saying is that the great thing about innovation and entrepreneurship is that it almost doesn't matter what's going on around you, because entrepreneurs are sort of in their own universe. They're different. They're not like the rest of the culture. They don't mind so much taking risks. They have a big idea that they think is going to change the world, and they'd rather do that, even though it's risky, than just going to get a job in a big company or something like that. And those people exist everywhere. And I think they actually exist more in countries that are on the rise. They're countries that have something to prove, countries that are excited about where they're going. You know, the countries that translated the book first have a very parochial measure of seriousness about innovation. Did you translate Startup Nation or not? You know, and it's out in about 21 languages. But the first languages to come out were Chinese and Korean and Portuguese and Brazil and Russian, and only later did it come out in Spanish in Spain and Italy and Germany and France and Japan, one of the last countries. And to me, this shows, you know, the countries that are more serious about innovation are the ones that are coming up, not the ones that are already kind of satisfied and happy. And the funny thing is, when I was in Spain, you know, there the economy has been running into big problems, and so that actually what they're seeing in Spain is an increase in entrepreneurship, because it's actually when the economy is doing well in a rich country, it's tempting not to worry about innovation, just to keep going and where you are. But when things get a little bad, or when you're ambitious about getting better, about lifting the country, then you're serious about innovation and entrepreneurship, because that's where the big opportunities lie. So I want to say something though about kind of copying Israel versus something else. I think the tendency when people look at Israel, when they hear about Startup Nation and they read the book and so on, and they think, you know, what is this relevant for us? What can we take from this story? And that's fine. There are things that can be taken from the story. But the more important lesson, I think, that we tend not to think about is that every country is different, and that every country builds its innovation sector in a different way. And we see this if we look at the United States versus Israel. I mean, the United States is a huge country, lots of resources, no enemies around it, none of the adversity that Israel faced. With Israel, it was a lot of overcoming adversity, the needing to innovation in order to survive. In the United States, they didn't have that problem, and yet they produced Silicon Valley. So clearly they had their own path to innovation that was different than Israel's path. And what this shows me is that every country has its own path based on its own strengths and its own culture and its own history. And the problem here is that we tend to be blind to our own strengths. We're very acutely aware of what we're not good at. That everywhere I go, people say, "Oh, we don't like to take risks," as if that's so unusual. Every country doesn't like to take risks. I mean, actually, I think in Asia it's even worse, and there's even more stigma against failure than there is, say, in Latin America or Europe. The very unusual thing is where it's okay to fail. And in fact, that's unusual about Israel, that there's a culture that sort of accepts the role of failure as part of the process of learning, accepts the role of failure because it's a necessary part of taking risks, and taking risks is necessary in order to succeed. But in most countries, the good news is that you don't have to change that culture of fear of failure. All you have to do is create a little enclave, a kind of subculture where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to take risks, where it's okay, where there's a lot of understanding that it's okay to start something new. And Silicon Valley is such a subculture. Silicon Valley is not like the rest of the United States. It's not like Cincinnati or Los Angeles or all kinds of places. It's a very different place. It's actually more like Israel. And so when we talk about building an innovation sector in Colombia, it's not about changing the entire culture. It is about creating a kind of a safe place, or nurturing a safe place, nurturing the entrepreneurs that are coming up already, and making it a little easier for them and a little more normal to do what they do. And those places are going to pop up in strange areas. They may, right here along this road, there's lots of universities. This is maybe a likely place for startups to come. Actually, startups often, governments tend to think, well, we want startups, so they build a tech park. The only problem is that startups don't like tech parks, usually. They like to be where the restaurants are, and they like to be in the kind of cool neighborhoods. They like to be where the rents are cheap. So the startups usually don't come up in the tech parks. They come up, who knows where they're going to come up in Bogota or other places. But where they do, you can start nurturing them. You can start encouraging them. You can start trying to make their lives easier. You can just sometimes label it. Like the city, when I was in London, they did something smart, which was, they saw that a bunch of startups were coming up in an area, the not so nice part of town, but that's where people like to be. Maybe there was places, bars, restaurants, and so on. And the startups were kind of congregating there, and so they called that part of London Tech City. And I think that's a very smart thing to do. Rather than building a tech park, we simply kind of brand it as that area, as the startup area of the city or the country. So the last part is, I think that one of the most powerful things is not so much copying as innovating together. And I think that you probably already know, if any of you are trying to do startups, or if any of you are even when it comes to research or studying or whatever you're doing, you know that the way to get things done is with a team. You know that different people are good at different things, and that you tend to, the best chances of success are working together with people who complement each other. For example, when it comes to startups, you try to combine a team of one who's good at business, one who's good at tech, one who's good at design, one who's good at marketing. So this is how we think in life, and it's the right way to think. But we don't think that way when it comes to countries. Just like different people are good at different things, different countries are better at different things. We're good at startups, but we're lousy at lots of other things. We're lousy at planning, we don't like authority, we don't have any respect for authority. We don't like hierarchy. We don't like management. We don't like sales. We don't know much about markets because we're kind of far from the markets. And startups in general have a problem of not understanding markets because they're not in the market yet. So there are all kinds of things that, we're good at certain pieces of the puzzle. but we're not good at a lot of other pieces that are very important. And it's the opposite thing in many other places. The interesting thing about Israel is it complements so many countries, where other countries are better at a lot of the stuff that you add to technology. And this is another important lesson. You know, we think of innovation and technology as almost the same thing. They're not. Technology is part of innovation, but it's increasingly not the main part. Because technology is becoming ubiquitous. As technology advances, it's easier and easier to get whatever bits of technology you need. And if you think about, you know, even the companies that we think of as technology companies, like high-tech companies like Facebook or Twitter, what's the technology? There's no technology innovation in these companies. Their innovation is based on an idea. They didn't, you know, Mark Zuckerberg didn't invent some new kind of way for the internet to run. He invented something to do on the internet that wasn't the actual innovation, was not technological. And even things that, like the iPhone, that are very technological, it's probably the part that Apple adds in terms of design, in terms of the ethos around Apple, and kind of the sense of people just want something from Apple more than they want it from another company. That's not necessarily about technology. It's what you add to it. And Steve Jobs would always say that the genius of Apple is the marriage of technology with liberal arts. So I want you to know that whatever it is you're studying, I mean, I know that some of you are in engineering, some of you are in science, some of you are probably in the arts and literature and all kinds of things. It's all relevant to innovation. It's all relevant to innovation. And that the partnership that Israel needs is with countries that are better at what we do, at things, at other things, and that tends to be things like design, things like arts, things like culture, and certainly things like understanding Latin America, understanding your own country, Colombia. We're never, like, if we want to do something in Latin America, we're never going to understand it the way you do. We need to partner with you. And so I think that the most powerful way that we can help each other is to innovate together. And I think the best thing maybe is if we could have some discussion, because I feel like I'm rambling. So it'd be great if we could have some discussion and get into some more topics. Thank you.